Okay, so okay, guys, we're here with Daniel.
How's it going, guys?
Daniel Ornellas, who's living in Nashville, and who surfs Blue Thunder. Daniel, I just want to start by just saying thanks for spending time here. And the first question I have for you is just your background. I actually remember back in '97 or '98, Revival South Africa. Mm-hmm. And that's the first time I ever saw you. That was at Quigney Baptist in London, and you were playing a white bass guitar. I think it was probably. I think it was a white bass guitar. You didn't have white shoes on, but you had a white bass guitar. And your sister was singing, so I'm guessing it was about '97, '98. So the first question is, how did you get into music? How did you get into church? And where did those two things kind of intersect? Where did it all happen and start for you?
Yeah, funny you mentioned the Blue Thunder surfboard, but it actually is. It's an interesting thing because my dad was a Mizelle growing up. He was in a band called Hawk, which is a big African rock group in the '70s, and they were like a multicultural band during apartheid. So it was a whole thing, a whole story, and they were one of the biggest rock bands to come out of South Africa at the time. They got signed to Polyphonic Records in London at the same label as Peter Gabriel, and well, that was when I was like 1 year old that we moved to London. My family did, my mom and my dad and myself. We moved to London, and then the band fell apart. Just management stuff went weird, and my dad came back to South Africa. And my dad was on and off with, separated from my mom because of the lifestyle that he was living. A lot of drugs, a lot of, partying and the whole rock and roll thing. And my mom would always try and get them back together again to try and make it work. And eventually she was like, just for the sake of the kids, because we had to, my sister and I were already born. And then she went to a little house meeting, a church meeting, and she grew up Catholic. She had no real faith, honestly. She grew up just with a understanding of Catholicism. And my dad was always the spiritual one. Like, he had his own kind of religion he created where he'd smoke a lot of dope, and then he'd stand on his head for half an hour, and then he'd say, "I'm plugging into the source." And my mom used to always mock him and say, "Oh, the tomato sauce, you're plugging into the tomato sauce." But so she went to this little house meeting, and this 80-year-old woman from America was there, and she prayed for my mom. My mom fully got like a massive connection with God and got baptized that following week, and then told my dad, "Listen, it's over. We're not gonna. I want you to move on with your life, and I've found something, and I've found God." And my dad was very intrigued by it. He came to the baptism of my mom to try and actually cause a scene, to try and he got all drunk, and then they were going to arrive there and cause a vibe, and they couldn't find the church, and they were driving up and down the street, and eventually when they found the church, the service was over, and my mom was outside, and her hair was wet from being baptized, and my dad said he saw something in her eyes that he realized something's happened for real. So he went back and started reading John, the book of John, in his house that he lived in with all the other bandmates. And he realized that the Bible was talking directly to him, and so he got saved like radically. He wrote a song that was super, changed my life, took up my cross and made a stand for Jesus. Within 2 months, my parents were back together again, and then my dad went to Bible school. Long story short, went to Bible school at Rhema, and my mom did as well. And my dad was the worship pastor at Rhema for a while, and it was in a band called the Rhema Band with a bunch of other dudes, and then moved to Cape Town to plant a church in Mitchell's Plain, which is a mixed race community in Cape Town. And I grew up really as a kid from about 11 that's when we moved to Cape Town, 10 or 11, for the next 20 something years. My dad pastored that church in Cape Town. So I grew up starting to take interest. I was always kind of, as a family, my dad would always my dad would always be like, go and minister and preach in different churches, and he'd say, we're going to sing as a family. And it was always the worst thing for me. I was not into it at all. I just wanted to surf every day. And I told my dad, I want to be a surfer. That's what I want to be. And so he was like, no, you must. So I remember at 6 years old, I started playing acoustic guitar because he was teaching classes in our house to try and make some money, because I live by faith fully. So he used to have like a little box at the door, and people would put money if they wanted to give some money, but he taught free guitar lessons, and then if people wanted to give him something, they could. So I was in the group of people that was learning to play. And so I picked up acoustic guitar from about 6, and then I played it on and off And then at about 14, I went to a mission trip that we did in Zimbabwe, and there was like an African band there that were just like all into the funk thing. And then the bass player, a friend of mine now, Moffat, he was playing this like jazz bass, and he's just so good at the bass. And I was so intrigued by it because it was like all the slap stuff, and I was like, wow, well, that's interesting. And so I decided, I told my dad, I really want to play bass. And he said, I'll buy you a bass guitar as long as you promise you're not going to pick up an electric guitar when you turn 16 and leave the bass. So I was like, okay, cool. So I started playing bass, and I started playing in church. And, at that stage, worship was kind of really interesting because it was all the Ron Canoli stuff, which was all very jazz or like funk driven. So all the Ad Laboriel stuff was really tricky playing, but it caused me to learn a lot as a bass player. And I was in a church that was like a mixed race church, so they were really into that vibe, and so I had to really learn my chops in that scene. And then I went to study jazz, which is another story because I wasn't really a jazz guy. So after a year of that, I dropped out and went to work in the States with an evangelist, Rodney Howard Brown. My sister and I worked for him for a year, went to Bible school, and then came back to South Africa, and we started a band together. My sister and I had started writing songs then, and I started a band called Naked Lyric, which was like a Christian soft rock, I guess, band in Cape Town. My sister and myself and a bunch of guys, and we ran around and did that for about 5 years. And then at the end of that, I started working in the film industry, and I thought music was done. I mean, my bass used to stand in the corner of my house gathering dust for about 6 months. And then all of a sudden, the 363 guys came back from the States on their first trip and said, hey, John told me, like, we're packing up the band, the bass player's leaving, the manager's leaving. So he said, I'm canceling the 2 gigs we've got in South Africa. And I was like, what? You can't do that. People are expecting to see the band. That you guys have been overseas. So he said there was 2 big gigs. One of them was the 5FM Bash or whatever it was in Johannesburg, and the other one was, I think it was, I don't know. I remember it was a big show in Pietermaritzburg or Durban. And so I said, I'll fill in for you guys, and I'll play bass just because it was off season for film industry stuff. And so as soon as we started playing together, everyone was like, wow, this is special. And so, then the record label in the States was like, hey, could you guys make another record? And so John asked me if I'd play on the record, and then he said, can you tour with us to London? We're doing some shows in the UK. And so I said, I'll do that. But then after that, I have to quit because I got to start working film gigs again. And then in London, they were like, come with us to the States and play a festival con Dios. And I was like, listen, if I'm doing this, then I'm joining the band and we're going to do this otherwise. And that was the next 9 years of my life. So I started touring with Tree. We went all over the world for a number of years, 9 years or so. And then John moved back to South Africa, and I started playing with Brenton Brown, who's a buddy of mine. He actually wrote a lot of the early Naked Lyric songs.
Okay.
He wrote like Bite My Tongue and Dancing with the World and the stuff that got on the radio in South Africa that did really well for our band. So long story short, we were buddies for a long time. I started playing with him. His career kind of took off here more as a songwriter, but we still toured quite a bit, and I still tour with him today. So what's that, like 12 or 15 years later, I'm still playing with him. Whenever he plays, we do mainly kind of big corporate type things now. And yeah, so that's my whole family journey, bro. And music and church, yes, yeah. And for me, my faith, it was interesting because I was always sort of, my parents' religion was my faith, and I never really found a radical thing for me personally initially. And then when I was 19, I was surfing in Huntington Beach in California, and I bumped into a dude who was actually so wildly on fire for God, and he was a pro surfer, and he's just paddling in the water and praying for people that like, and I was just like, what is this guy doing? It just blew my mind. But it was such a weird thing because God used him to radically influence my desire to seek him. And so that was quite a big change at around about 19 years old. I found 17, 18 or 19, somewhere around about there. I found that I wanted to actually believe it for myself, So yeah, interesting times.
Yeah, I mean, it's incredible how I suppose ingrained everything was for you, and I mean your entire life, like you've been in there the whole time, playing music, doing the Christian circuit, so to speak, if you know what I mean. And It's just yeah, sure. It's a long time that you've been.
Yeah, and I was doing worship or Christian music from when I was a kid with my family, traveling around and singing. And my family used to travel to Sweden and the States and all that. My dad used to sing and preach, and then we'd all go with him, and we'd sing and stuff from when I was 15 or 16. The Feather Market Hall in PE, some guys have got video of that. That's actually back in the day when there was like some Christian conference that happened there. A bunch of guys that and so all those years. And then for the first time I actually started working outside of Christian music was with Little Big Town. They're a big country band, and I was doing playback for them. And then after that I worked with Camila Cabello on the Taylor Swift tour for a year. And it was radical because it was so different from what I'd been doing. And for the first time, it actually was like, hey, I don't actually earn my income from people looking to see who you are. And so like the idea of, the reason why you kind of have to keep yourself together is because what if someone, basically what I'm getting at is if your income is directly attached to how good of a Christian you are, it can be weird. And for all those years, I never realized, but that was the thing, is like, hey, you can't do this and you can't do that, and you got to, otherwise you're going to end up in a situation where you could lose your job.
We don't get paid.
Yeah. And so I think that some of that is weird to start with, is that people have to, it's the same for pastors or anybody, you're making that decision based on, if I do something wrong, then, or if I swear, or if I, whatever, drink something, or I don't know, whatever. But if you not fully, there's a pressure on you the whole time to act a certain way for people, not for God, for people. And it's something that I didn't realize was so deeply ingrained from being a pastor's son, and your dad's saying, hey, if you guys, basically, if I'd screwed up, my dad's income would have been affected by the fact that he can't keep his family together because he's a pastor.
Yeah.
So right from early on, it's there. And so
that's big pressure for pastors' kids. I mean, that's huge pressure for pastors' kids. Just that thing of constantly having to keep that in the back of your mind. That, like you say, it's not about God; it's about people.
Yeah.
Tough one.
Yeah, it's tough. And I think sometimes it actually helps, because I remember even when I was younger with Naked Lyric and all that scene before I got married, we had to have accountability with someone in one of our buddies in the church, and his people was our accountability guy, because people love to say stuff and talk and cause trouble. And so, but it actually, in a lot of ways, music, I think, kept me from just going my own way, really, because I knew, hey, if you're going to be a voice on a stage in the name of Jesus, then you better have your act together. So I think in a lot of ways, just being involved helped me to keep close, if you want to call it that, to the Lord. Yeah.
I think next question is kind of just of what you've been saying. So, a lot of musicians play in churches. So I'm talking a bit about the church musician now. I think they're in church, but they're not necessarily close to God. And I see that quite often, so you spoke about your relationship kind of changed when you were 19, So I think it's so easy to be a church musician and be so far away from God. And I mean, is it because there's no community? What do you think is the reason for that? I mean, it doesn't happen all the time, but I know it does happen with a lot of people, where it almost becomes about going through those motions of, well, I'm on today, I've got to play, and that's not really my time to worship, and I'm never really getting word. So where, just finding your balance in that, and as a Christian, where it becomes real for you, past playing just music, past just being just a musician, where you actually are there to kind of to be part of the community, to receive from God. I don't know. Am I making the question clear?
You're making a lot of sense. Yeah, no, I do have a lot of thoughts about that. One of the things that I've been doing, like you said, I've done this in so many environments. I've worked for pastors, I've worked for other evangelists, I've played in churches, I've played in so many churches with Brenton Brown as a kind of guest worship team. I've been involved in San Diego, there's a church that we used to play every month. And then in Brenton's home church, I used to fly to LA once a month to play in his church. So there was almost like a residence that we had there. And there's been certain churches where, and this is going to segue into what you were talking about earlier before, I don't know if you'd hit record yet, but nicely into the whole idea of like, about how do churches kind of relate to their team and you know, that whole thing. But there's been times where I've definitely felt like I've almost felt like we're the staff of the hotel that clean the hotel room. You know what I mean? As the worship team, you know, you feel like you're being used a bit and abused a bit and not looked after, but they want you to perform. You're not making, obviously there's been churches I've played in where they don't pay you anything, which is fine, but you better look after them. If they're volunteers, it's 10 times more of a thing you have to do to look after those guys. Otherwise,
can I just stop you there? You say they don't have to pay you, but they need to look after you. What do you mean by that? So what does that looking after you look like if they're not paying you?
Yeah, so the Church of the City, which is the church I play at now with Chris McCloney and his crew, we get paid very little money, but we get paid something anyway. So it's basically like covers my wife and our car's gas, our petrol for the week, basically, is what we get paid. And so as far as being paid to play, that's not a lot of money, but it's just, hey, we appreciate you kind of thing. Now, that's not what I feel the most stoked about. What I do feel most stoked about is it's a mega church. So there's lots of big people, lots of people in the church, and there's quite a few people on the team. And so what they've done is they've hired a guy by the name of Anthony Skinner, who's a really good dude. I've actually known him from when I was 19. I moved to Nashville years and years ago, and I met him. I actually stayed in his house with him. It's a crazy story, but we've known each other for a long time. But he's become the church creative team pastor. So he's a great singer and a great songwriter, but he doesn't ever actually lead worship. His job is to look after the creatives in the church. So he'll phone me up all the time and say, hey, how are you actually doing? And I'm like, what? You know, and so it's the first time really, honestly, that I feel like I'm being singled out to be nurtured, yeah, to be pursued. And like he'll say to me, hey, tell me how your day is going, or he'll text me, or he'll say, hey, let's go out for lunch, and he'll take me out to lunch. And his job is to look after the creatives in the church, not just the musicians, but anyone that's an artist, or anyone that's a fine artist, or anyone that's in the creative world. It's his gig and his job, and he's on salary to actually go and look after those people and see that they're being pastored and looked after and nurtured. And so it's a different feeling when I go up there, when I have to show up at 7 a.m. to start rehearsing with the band and then play. It's a different feeling to when I felt like I'm obliged to do it because well, that's your first fruits of your ministry, and you've been given this gift, and God expects 10%, and so if you're not being paid, you must give your 10% through your music and all that. There's been all these kind of different frames where I've been, and there's some churches where the guy that's actually on salary is the worship pastor, and he's shouting about us being late, or he's not nurturing at all. He's almost like a boss of at your job, and he's bossing you around and telling you like this and that about your tone or whatever, but then not looking after you on top of that. And that he's being paid to be there and you're not. And it just to blow my mind. And I used to tell guys, don't go. Don't even go. If a guy's going to treat you like that, don't bother even showing up. But because there was an opportunity to play on stage, which getting to the heart of all of the stuff you said to me in the initial question was, why do you think there's guys that are lukewarm and they're bummed and they're in church and they're playing in the worship team? And I think that you've got to actually start off with the motivation of why do you actually play on stage in church? What's your motivation for being there? Is it that you can't get another gig? Is it that you feel like, is it that you feel like you don't really get to play anywhere? So there's a crowd and there's like and there's some other good players in the band. And so you want to jam with them. So you decide, I want to be in that church band. And good players are going to pull in good players. It's the way it works. If you have a great band in church, you're going to want to be part of it. And then really a bad worship band is like no one that's a great player is going to rush off and want to play in a terrible band. It's just the way it kind of works. So even in building your church's worship band, you've got to try and draw in the right guys, but then you've got to draw in the right guys with the right motivation. So then it's another hole.
Yeah.
So even from the motivation of the players themselves, ourselves, let's just lump me in with everybody. It's very hard you have to actually judge your motivation right from the beginning and go, why do I want to be there? And what do I expect to get out of it? And then if you can't get, like I talk about this with touring artists as well. I say, guys that's bands kind of go along for a while and then they just blow up and explode. I mean, and no one's happy and they bail and the whole thing's over. I go, what caused you guys to break up? One guy will say, I wasn't making enough money. The other guy will say, I wasn't singing our own material. Another guy will say, the crowds were too small. And it seemed like they were getting smaller and smaller. So you get to the root of why these people do music in the first place. And like for me, I don't have to play my original songs to feel like I'm doing something valuable, because right from the beginning with my dad and everybody, our motivation was to see that people would connect with God. So it was a very good kind of, nurtured in a good way. So moving out of Tree 63, which was amazing, creative rock and roll music, into playing with Everlasting God every week with Brenton. Not that Everlasting God because it's a great song, but it was a different thing to playing with Tree. And it never budged me. I never thought, oh, what a bummer. And someone actually asked me once, how does it feel going from Tree into Brenton's band and playing worship on church on Sundays? And I was like, honestly, I love Brenton. I actually am happy. The guy's an amazing guy. I love playing with him. The dynamic within our own group was better than in the band before, for whatever reasons. We were closer buddies. We were more like each other, similar to each other. And so I felt happy in that environment. So the same kind of thing goes on for, imagine a worship team where it's an amazing band, but the worship pastor's a real idiot. He'll still probably have a band all along, and the guys will put up with his misery because it's a good band. So you know what I mean? So it's the same thing. There's certain things that cause people to be there. Why are you there? Oh, because I get paid really well. I hate the music, but man, I get paid well. Well, why are you there? Oh, because the music's incredible. We don't get paid a dime and we have to be there 5 days a week, but the music's insane and it really fulfills me. So finding your motivation and what is it that makes you excited about being involved in something. And everybody's different. So some people might feel like, if it pays well, I'll do it. Some people might find. So if you're going to handle volunteers in church, you have to give them something that gives them a reason to say, I'm happy to give up my weekend for this. And it's not just because I want to be in front of people because I don't get to play anywhere else. And if you can get that right, I think, and if you can look after people well, I think you can have a really successful situation,
It's always going to come down to that, looking after people and those relationships, I guess, at every turn, also just becomes, like you say, just becomes a gig,
just to finish that quickly off, cap on it, is there's like the motivation of the actual lead worship guy or the worship pastor or whoever's in charge, let's call it the guy that's the main guy in the worship scene. He's going to, in the worship of that church, is going to either perpetuate his motivation or, so some guys just want to be a rock star. They wish they were in Hillsong United, but they happen to be in a small, like a medium-sized church in South Africa or Nashville or whatever. And their desire really is to be Joel Houston, but they're never going to really be Joel Houston. So they'll be a poor man's Joel Houston, and they'll strive radically to be and in their mind, he's almost like a worship pop star. So they aspire to that. They make sure everyone's dressed well. Hey, the light must be right. Hey guys, geez, that one riff, you have to play it exactly like the record. And it's because his motivation is like, he would like to be seen to be the same as Hillsong. And so his motivation is that. And so he's going to perpetuate that through his band. And he might have a lot of guys that are into that because that's what they're also there for. And you might have a lot of people going, this is a show, this is weird, this is not what I signed up for, I wanted to serve our church. And Brenton's vibe is pretty interesting because he's really, he understands that it's a hospitality business, really. You're in hospitality, it's just because you're holding an electric guitar doesn't mean you're a rock star. It's more like you're in hospitality business of actually making people feel comfortable, welcome, and give them an opportunity to connect with God. And that's what really worship is. And if you can get your head around that, and realize that it's not the other thing, then you can pursue other avenues to go and play. We did a record called Dream Seed with Brenton, and it's a mainstream rock record with Aaron from John Mayer's drummer, myself, Dwayne Laring, Brenton, and a few guys, and we put this record together. It's amazing. It's not a Christian record. It's just like Coldplay or whatever you want to call it, something like that. And it was another avenue for us to get that thing, that itch that we had to make other music that was more technical. So yeah, you've got to be able to say, you can't force everything through the same straw. You know what I mean? Like some people are like, I'm going to perform and I'm into metal. So wherever I get a gap, I'm going to throw those fills in church, and guys do it. And then they wonder why everyone's, guys, you got to tone it down. It sounds so weird. What's going on? It's because their motivation's creeping in to their performance, and they're not able to just go, this is not that. This is something else. This is me being an usher and helping people to meet with God. And so, yeah, there's so much to unpack with all this stuff. There's so many things. And even the church, the motivation of the pastor, I've been to churches where I won't mention the name of the church, but there's a big church in San Diego where the pastor is like a football player type guy who doesn't understand music at all. And so he lets the band come out like court jesters beforehand so that they can fire up the crowd, so that when he walks out there, everyone's already ready to like see him do his massive show. And so he sees the band almost as like the guys that run out on the football field with flags and get everybody excited. He doesn't carry the weight or the value of what worship is to a church. Then you got, what's Houston? I forget the pastor's name. Brian Houston, yeah. So his son's Joel. So my family went and actually crazy, but we sang in '96. We sang at the Hillsong the big Hillsong worship conference. Wow. It was us and Ron Canoli, which is so weird. My dad, myself, playing with backing tracks at Hillsong, and there was already a big church, and that was when Shout to the Lord had just come out. So it was already a big happening church.
Sure.
Joel was like a little kid running around. Hillsong United, none of that stuff had happened yet. But we were there, and I remember meeting Joel, the pastor, Brian, in his office, and just talking, and his heart was just like, guys, the worship is so exciting. His whole model of his church was wrapped around the fact that he valued worship almost at least as much as what the word was that was coming from him. And so it caused, it's almost like the worship has made a way for that church throughout the whole world to expand into this massive thing that's bigger than life, just because of the fact that he valued and he understood the value of good songwriting, good worship. And then, and then there's other churches that are very much driven by the pastor being a hero, like his own, like the Pope almost. There's these big mega churches that have got like the other guy you just mentioned before that, Joel Osteen. Joel Osteen.
Yeah.
And so his thing is like he's the star, he's so big. The church is so big that they hire different people in every week, and the figures they pay them to play and lead worship are staggering. What they get paid, like what's his name? The guy that's name is what's the guy's name? He's an R&B kind of guy.
Israel.
Israel. Yeah, Israel goes and plays there. He leads once a month. So he's literally playing 12 gigs a year there and gets paid a ridiculous amount of money because the guy wants star worship leaders. He wants rock stars on stage. So so they don't have their own culture of worship and their own songs they don't have that. They import that into their big arena so that they can put on a big show. And then there's other churches like Elevation where the pastor's basically a worship leader himself, and he's like, and so Bethel is the same thing. Bethel's not a big church, but they've got this massive reach because they've placed a lot of value in worship and worship leaders and nurturing them.
Yeah.
And some do a better job than others, and some see the mission and the vision more than the people, and so there's a lot of turnover of staff. There's big organizations that I won't mention that have like huge turnover of worship leaders and people coming through there that they're like a steamroller. They roll over the guys and keep going because their vision is bigger than their desire to look after the people that help make it happen. So